to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined today by Tim Martinez. And as you can see, we are not in our usual spot at the First Pacific Financial Studio. They are conducting workplace training there. So unfortunately, there was a little bit of conflict there because we always appreciate their graciousness and allowing us to use their space. But we're ad-libbing it today in the actual Columbian building. But it doesn't matter because we have a lot of good stuff to talk about when it comes to playoff basketball. And Tim, the playoffs are finally here.
Finally here. I mean, it's like every year you start the season and you think, playoffs is a long time away, but next thing you know, it's February. It's almost the middle of February when we're diving straight into district and by-district playoff games, and it's an exciting time, busy week this week. Lot on the schedule, a lot of games that we hope actually get played.
Yeah, because we were just talking before this. We're releasing this episode one day early on a Wednesday, and the last time we did that was because we were talking about a big Union versus Camas girls basketball game that ended up not getting played because a cable snapped in the hoop support at the Union gym. So we're hoping this isn't a harbinger of more disruption when it comes to weather on Thursday and Friday. We hope we get these games in because I think it's going to be a really exciting certainly for the by-district tournaments because of a new format they have. Why don't you run us through the new format that will certainly play to the advantage of a couple of our teams and I believe make it a more fair tournament?
Yeah, so the previous brackets that have been used for the West Central District up in the Tacoma area for the last couple of years, they changed the bracket up for a couple of reasons. One is they wanted to protect the best teams and give the best teams the chance of clinching state berths, but they also wanted to limit the number of games that they played. Particularly the teams from down here would complain about the previous format that they had back probably before the pandemic, had teams making 4 and even 5 trips up to the Tacoma area, and that became a real burden on, we had teams putting in 1,500 miles to play by district games and doing that on school nights and stuff. So they changed the format a few years back, so where you had a sort of a top bracket and a bottom bracket. And the top bracket was all the best teams in the leagues that comprise this by district tournament. And if you won that first game, then you clinched a state berth and you went to the semifinals and then the finals. If you lost, you went into the losers bracket. And the bottom half of the bracket of the old format was they were all just loser out. So if you lost a game, you had to play like 3 loser out games just to make it to state.
I think the first 2 were definitely loser out
First
games.
2 were definitely loser outs, and then there's some flexibility in there. So it was a very challenging route to get to state for the teams that were on that side of the fence. And so I think this year they went back to a true 16-team double elimination bracket, and they actually went in and seeded the teams, because previously they were sort of slotted by the number 1 team from the South Puget Sound would be here, the number 1 team from the Greater St. Helens League would be here, and the North Puget Sound League would be here, and so forth. This time they got together with a committee and they actually slotted and seeded a team. So the good news for the teams from down here in Southwest Washington is it created an opening, at least on the girls' side, in which there are 2 teams that will be at home to open the by-district tournament. And the girls open scheduled on Thursday. That's when they're scheduled. And so not only we have 2 teams that are going to be opening at home and playing, the first of in a double elimination situation, they could potentially play 2 home games, because if they win the first round and they get to the quarterfinals, those are also at home sites, so they could also be home in the quarterfinals. So it's the route's the same for everybody. So you got to win 2 games to clinch the state berth. And if you lose 2 games, you're done, you're out. I think that's the way mostly. And there might be a 7th place in one of these brackets where you get an extra shot.
It is in the 3A.
Yeah.
3A gets 7 berths, 4A gets 6.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So, again, like for Camas girls were the number 2 seed from the Greater St. Helens League. In the previous format, they would go into the loser out bracket, and they would have to play loser out games to reach state. I think Union was in the situation last year. They had to go through that loser out game, and then and I think they lost another game, which put them into like the seventh place game, the last spot, and they ended up losing that one as well, and didn't get to state. So Camas this year, they've got a truer route to make it to state. They got to win 2 potentially home games to make it to state, and so in that situation, it benefits teams now. Over on the boys' side, they had one team that would be at home to open on Wednesday, but 2 teams are heading on the road. So those teams will be, potentially making 4 trips up north to play in this bracket moving forward. So it's a little bit more travel for them. But I think overall, I think the fact that they met and they seeded these brackets kind of helps get the bracket right, so you don't have any oddball teams, oddball matchups.
Yeah, I agree, and that's one thing I wanted to talk about. And you mentioned it, that in the old scenario, Camas girls would be in basically a back to the wall situation. Well, they're really in the same situation in the 3A that the Mountain View girls are. They're both number 4 seeds. Mountain View obviously won their league, but Camas, by virtue of seeding and kind of by virtue of their reputation and their overall record, gets a pretty high seed. Obviously, their back-to-back losses to the number 1 seed Union aren't going to hurt them that much when it comes to the eyes of an actual human seeding committee versus being, railroaded into that number 2 GSHL seat on the bottom half in the losers part of the bracket, as they used to call it. But now, Camas, they play. Who is it? They're playing 2 games at home, like you said. Win both of those, you're going to state. Mountain View, same thing. 2 games at home. First of all, you're going to be favored against Thomas Jefferson, and then you play again at home against River Ridge or Kelso, even a team that you're familiar with. And so it's a much more clear road and an advantageous road that benefits the teams that really did well over the regular season.
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag of the previous 2 formats that they used. Again, the format before the 2 formats back. In that format, home teams would host first round games, and then after that they would go to sites, and those sites were up north. They were in Tacoma, they were in Puyallup or Auburn or maybe Olympia, and so that's where all that travel, because even if you were the number 1, you were going to play 3 other games in that tournament, which meant you were making trips up and back. This will give teams the first 2 rounds of this tournament are at home sites. So depending on how the bracket works out, you can have the potential of playing 2 games at home, or you're going on the road if that's the way the bracket works out. So.
Well, and the format also benefits a team like the Evergreen Girls, a team that, again, runner-up in the league, would have been on the road in a loser-out game, or I don't know if on the road necessarily, but
right.
Facing a loser-out game. Instead, they get the number 7 seed, and will be at home in a first round game that they'll be favored in. They win that, even though they'll probably have to play number 2 White River if they win that first round game in a winner to state game. But you've gotten past that first hurdle at home in a non-loser out situation, and then let the chips fall where they may in the consolation bracket, or you shock the world and you beat a number 1 or a number 2 seed and find yourself with a lot of momentum heading into state.
And even if if Evergreen Girls can open up and win at home to open the tournament, and even if they go and they play the number 2 seed in the bracket and they lose that, well, then they drop back next week and they just have to win their next game. And that should probably be a favorable situation for them. So it's like. It's a lot different than if they had been in the old bracket. Any loss and you're basically done. So, I think it's a good mix of the 2 previous systems, and I think the local teams here in the Greater St. Helens leagues, overall, I think benefited, because I think in the 3A girls, you had 2 teams who are in top 8 seeds, which means they're going to be home this week or to open. The boys, Prairie came out at number 6, which is kind of low for a league champion, but their overall win record is not And the league, the teams up north in the Tacoma and the 3A are often, it's a challenging tournament to be in. So there's a lot of good teams up there. So there's that.
Well, and then talk about the 3A boys. Mountain View boys are in a very similar situation to the Evergreen girls in that last year as the number 2 team out of the league, they would have, again found themselves in a loser out situation. But now they're going to be at home in an 8-9 game, one that if they win, they'll go against the number 1 seed probably in the next round. But you've started the tournament in a winning fashion, and you have a chance to build some momentum instead of immediately back to the wall.
Right, and so of the 4 leagues between the 4A and the 3A and boys and girls, we had the 2 3A boys are at home to open, 2 3A girls at home to open, 2 4A girls at home to open, and it's just the 4A boys where only Camas is going to open at home. Skyview boys, number 2 seed out of the league, they're on the wrong side of a 9-8 matchup, and so they got to head up to, I believe, Sumner to play. Yeah. So, but I think overall a good situation for the Fraser Hills League.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of teams that we think are well positioned to make some noise and make a run through the district and by district tournaments and hopefully get a real strong seeding to state. And I think you got to start with the 2 teams that got really good news on Sunday. Number 1 seed Union Girls, number 1 seed Camas Boys. Union Girls, I've been really impressed with their growth over the season. I had a chance to bump into Coach Gary Mills at Union signing day, and we just sort of briefly chatted about kind of how his team has come together. And obviously, I think we knew going into the season that Brooklyn Haywood was going to score a ton of points. She's someone that can, when she gets hot, she's as deadly of a shooter as there is. But it's always what are the other pieces around her going to do? And I think you saw last year where maybe the supporting cast, wasn't quite as well rounded as they needed to be to make it to state, and they eventually couldn't get out of by districts. But this year, with the addition of the Chapman sisters coming over from Ridgefield, and then the ascendance of some younger players, I look at Mila Larry as being one that I think her defenses really stood out to me. I think that's the Titans have become that kind of well-rounded team where you have an elite scorer, an elite shooter, an elite star basically in Brooklyn, but then you have those supporting casts, the role players that every good team needs to make a deep run.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with the Titans is that the supporting cast is yes, I think a little bit stronger than they were last year, but more consistent.
Yes.
And so I think that gives you have a star player like Brooklyn Haywood. There were games where that supporting cast struggled, and it really put the onus on Brooklyn to kind of try to take over, which is a challenge on anyone when you're getting double teamed and triple teamed sometimes. I think they've grown together, and that consistency builds confidence. And I was really impressed to see them. I saw them play in their second game against Camas, and I was really kind of sort of impressed by their overall strength, and obviously the coaches were giving them the number 1 seed. That's the West Central is a tough district historically. Last year when Camas won the state title, they had to go through and beat a couple of West Central teams before getting to Gonzaga Prep. So again, historically teams like Tahoma and Sumner and some of the other teams from up there are strong, and and Union comes in with 2 losses. A 2-point loss at Camas earlier in league play, and then an overtime loss to AC Davis of Yakima, which is also a really good team.
I think the number 1 RPI team. Yeah.
Maybe
I haven't looked, but
I don't look at RPI, so I don't really know. But anyway, but they've got a strong team, and the Titans played them well. So I think this number 1 seed bodes well for them, getting to state. And I think then bodes well doing the state, and it'll be great. I think it'll be great to see a player like the rest of the state gets to see a player like Brooklyn Haywood on a big stage, something that they haven't had the opportunity to because Titans haven't been able to push through and make it to that point. So.
Well, yeah, and I think coming in as the number 1 seed in a strong tournament like the West Central District tournament, if they make it through and take care of business and get to state, I gotta think they're in a good position to get an advantageous seed that will get them at least in the top 12, but possibly passage in the top 8 straight to Tacoma.
Yeah. So yeah, that's yeah. If this bracket plays out the way it's seeded, then that's typically you're talking about possibly a top 4 seed for the Titans if they can keep on winning.
And the other team that got some great news on Sunday, Camas boys. And when I saw Camas wrap up the league title a couple weeks ago against Union, I was just so impressed, not only by the all-around just complete player that Ethan Harris has become. I mean, find yourself someone who's 6'9", that can shoot from threes like he does, that can rebound like he does, that can handle the ball and pass like he does, but also just sort of the evolution of Camas as a whole. Last year, they were a team that beat you by shooting threes. And you do that when you have great shooters like Beckett Curry or Jace Van Voorhees. And that's really what led Camas last year to making it to Tacoma. They'd get hot, they'd hit 14 three-pointers and rack up a bunch of points that way. This year, they're much more of a well-balanced team. They can get to the rim. They play incredibly fast, which isn't something that I noticed last year. But I was just really impressed with kind of the evolution of Camas from last year to now what I think is a much more dangerous team when it comes to the playoffs.
Yeah, the thing about teams that rely on the outside shot so much is that there are nights when the shots aren't falling, and you're going to have to struggle. You're going to have to find other ways to win, and it's also sometimes a challenge for those teams to win in gyms that they haven't played in before. It's a different environment, different backgrounds, especially when you get to the Tacoma Dome. The shooting. Often shooters struggle with the background at the Tacoma Dome. So, I mean, being able to come in and be well-rounded and to play like the way they've been playing, some teams might look at Camas boys' win-loss record and see a few losses there, but they went to the Les Schwab Invitational, played a lot of good teams from over in Oregon, pretty tough teams also in the non-league schedule back in December. So they kind of been battle tested, and now they're ready to carry their momentum from league into this bi-district tournament.
Well, they've won 11 of their last 12. That one loss coming to Union literally the day after they clinched the league title. And now you could say, oh, well, it's a perfect spot for a letdown. They just beat them by 30. They won the league title. They maybe let off the gas a little bit. But I'm a big believer of the philosophy that there are such things as good losses. And I think a loss like that can be good because I think a lot of teams, they go into the postseason having won 13, 14 in a row, and they think, oh, if we just stick to our game plan and do what we've been doing, we'll be fine. And then maybe they have a rough half, and then it's like, oh, what's going on here? We're not used to, we don't know how to handle being on the short end of something like that. But I think when you have a loss like that doesn't end up hurting you at all, it kind of just raises your guard a little bit, and it reminds you that if you don't take care of the little things, if you don't bring the intensity, that you can lose to a team like Union, who's good, but a team that you just beat by 30. But that shows that we got to bring that same intensity that allowed us to beat that team by 30 the previous night.
Right, and Union is one of 14 other teams in this tournament that are just like Union and capable like Union, and so that's something that the paper makers can kind of recall back and remember that doesn't really matter what records are, doesn't really matter what seeds are. I think they're going against Graham Kapowson in the first round. I think it's their first game. The team with 7 or 8 wins or something.
Yes.
So yeah, you can't take anyone for granted.
Well, and then you win that, you're against Sumner or Skyview, and so you know what you're getting in the next round. Basically, a team like Skyview, which has some nice players. I think of Malachi Weimer, who can score a bunch, and so if you're facing the Storm in a winner-to-state quarterfinal game, I think it's familiar, but it has that little bit extra spice and added intensity of being a quarterfinal winner-to-state game.
Yeah, that would be exciting if that matchup comes to play.
The next team I think is really well positioned to make a run in the postseason. I'm going to the 2A girls, and I like Columbia River because of two things: experience and defense. that was always been kind of the calling card of Coach T. Anderson's team since she took over. It's been really attention to detail on defense. But this is a team that made it to the Sun Dome in Yakima last year, got a lot of great state experience, and they bring almost everybody back from that team.
Yeah, I remember watching River play a couple times in the postseason last year, and the thing that struck me about the Rapids last year in their postseason run is that they didn't have a lot of size, and they were using players in the post who probably would be better off playing some other place on the floor if they had someone in that post position. So I was concerned about that because the players that they had in that post position had graduated, but they have some new players and some younger players stepping up, and that was the thing that I was lucky enough to get out to the Woodland game last week, shooting photos, and they really, the Rapids kind of said, all right, Woodland, if you guys are going to beat us, you're going to have to beat us with somebody other than Kennedy Bockert. And two players that stuck out defensively on that was sophomore Avi Desjarles.
Yeah, Desjarles.
Desjarles.
Yeah.
And Kaya Murtich, senior. They both kind of traded off sort of back, and then they had some guards like Peyton Dukes and some other players coming in and fronting Kennedy and saying, you're going to have to beat us from outside. And it took Woodland a little while to kind of adjust to that. They kind of made a little run early in the second half, made it tight, but then just couldn't sustain that, and the Rapids pulled away. So it kind of showed me that, moving forward, like last year they played the district title game against WF West, and they ran into the same situation. WF West had a player, Julia Dallin, really good post player, and it was and they did a good job on her in the first half of that district title game, but eventually she got her points. She drew fouls and got free throws, and WFO was able to pull away. So I think they're a little bit better equipped this year to deal with some of that size inside and allow their guard play to sort of work the outside.
Well, not only did the Rapids come up clutch in both games that were competitive games against a very good Woodland team with a standout player like Kennedy Barker, but in winning those games, I think the Rapids gained a huge advantage by being on the opposite side of the bracket from WF West, which I gotta think they're one of the favorites for the state title. I think they've lost one game this year. And so you don't have to face WF West until potentially the district championship game, whereas Woodland could potentially face them in the semifinals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also Woodland's a team to keep an eye on to kind of move on through and earn one of those 4 district spots. I think they've got again, like they showed they were gritty, they were tough against River's floor. I was really impressed. One thing I was really impressed from the Woodland River game was the Woodland supporters. They kind of turned that gym a little bit into Woodland East.
South.
Yeah,
Woodland South.
I was really impressed about the amount of folks from Woodland, both students and folks from the community, came out to that game. It was really kind of an electric atmosphere in the gym for that game. So.
All right. We'll touch briefly on the 2A boys just because I wanted to give a shout out to R.A. Long and that, Will Dender came back from covering their game against, I think, Columbia River last, and I was looking at it, it's like, I didn't even realize R.A. Long was like 18-1. It's kind of like they kind of had an early loss against River, and it's like, okay, we know R.A. Long is always good. At least they have been under the last few years ever since Jerry Key took over that program. They've had some excellent individual players coming through there, but it's like they didn't really stick out early, and then next thing you know, they just keep winning and winning and winning, and oh my gosh, they're headed into the postseason with just one loss, and I think in a really strong situation to get a high seed if they take care of business in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think the 2A Greater St. Helens League is really well positioned to grab. So they get four of the seeds out of that district tournament. You might see 3 of them come from the 3A Greater St. Helens League, and I think the fact that R. Long, again, it's kind of like it's like, oh yeah, they're 19-1 or 18-1. But they're kind of battle tested. They kind of gone against Mark Morris a couple times, River a couple times, and they really sort of handled Ridgefield in their most recent matchup. And so, Yeah, so a lot of good teams playing a lot of good basketball, and Ari Long certainly showed. I think you were kind of looking in the last couple of years, a few years with Ari Long. They always had like a star player,
Yeah.
that keeps their attention, but they kind of do it by committee. They have a couple of key players who kind of lead their scoring, but they kind of get contributions from all over that lineup.
Yeah, it was the Caven Holden show for the last few years, but now it's like, yeah, they spread the ball and are just a really solid, fundamentally sound, good team. One team I think we wanted to touch on as far as, you know, turning our heads, we kind of wondered what Fort Vancouver on the boys' side would do in the Trico League, and obviously Seton Catholic coming back as defending league champions, as making it to Yakima was always going to be the favorite, and they've done nothing to disappoint this season, going through the Trico undefeated. But Fort Vancouver gets that number 2 seed, and I'm really interested to see what the Trappers do in the district tournament.
Yeah, so with the number 2 seed, that means they'll open district at home.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to look back to see when the last time Fort Vancouver even got to a district bracket or even by district when they were up at 3A. And I knew they had some good teams right before the pandemic. Khalil Singleton played, but they didn't make, from what I saw while I was pulling up the brackets from right before, they didn't quite make it to the postseason those years at the 2A. So it's been a long, long time since the Trappers are in the postseason and hosting a postseason game. So they kind of stumbled a little bit down the stretch. They kind of secured up that number 2 spot after they lost to Seton for the second time, and they dropped to Kingsway and to La Center last week. It didn't change their seeding any, so you could take that into consideration. So I think this is a great opportunity for the Trappers to be at home and to get a district playoff win and get them on the doorstep of moving on to a state tournament. So,
well, I think the Trico League teams are very well set up because they're going against 3 Evergreen Conference teams in what has been more or less a down year for the Evergreen Conference. I think Elma, the team that Fort Vancouver is going to play, ended up being the number 3 seed out of the Evergreen Conference. Well, Elma's the only team in that league that has a winning record overall. All the other teams, I think, it's Montesano, Hoquiam, maybe. They're under 500 overall, but just happen to stack up a few key wins in league to get them to the top of that conference standings. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for Trico League teams to get through that tournament.
Yeah, and we're seeing I think it's so because of the weather again we're talking about. So there are a lot of games that were scheduled for Thursday. We're starting to see some of the games get moved up to Wednesday already. I think the Fort game got moved up from Thursday to Wednesday for boys, and I think Kingsway is going up to Monty. I think they're doing it also on Wednesday. So they're already being proactive and trying to get ahead of the weather. Another game that's been moved, Washougal boys are in a play-in game into the 2A district tournament, and they were scheduled for Thursday. They're going to play a doubleheader with the girls playing the same round in the play-in game at 5 on Wednesday, followed by the boys at 6:30. Waiting to see for the rest of this day to shake out whether other teams are going to try to get ahead of the weather. I've been looking at the weather because I always want to plan for these things. It looks like right now Thursday there may be some snow, some light snow, maybe an inch or two coming in late in the day. Mm-hmm. So you'll probably go to school on Thursday, kids. So sorry about that. But again, the games are played at night. So do teams want to travel? Do they want to come and go? And then a potentially icy morning situation on Friday. But it might clear up in time in the evening to play games. And normally if you don't go to school, you don't play, but it's the playoffs, so they might make exceptions.
No, I think Saturday it's just rain.
Saturday it should be warm and rain, and so for like the 1A tournaments, they're playing 1 game this week and then 2 next week, so they've got a window to play with, so they could just decide to say, we'll just play Saturday or even next Monday. The 4A and the 3A and the 4A, they were planning to play 2 games this week, Wednesday, Friday, or Thursday, Saturday, so that could get kind of muddled up there, and then the 2As, I think, so they have these pigtail games on Wednesday and Thursday, and then the tournaments start Friday and Saturday. So again, there might be there might be a lot of busy Saturday if the situation works out. So.
Well, I cleared my calendar. I'm flexible. I don't know where we're going to go yet. We'll just have to see how it shakes out. But that's the fun of this time of year, the busiest time of year and the best time of year. Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm excited to see how these teams, because especially at all these tournaments, but especially the 3A and the 4A, they're going up. Teams are going up and playing teams that we don't really know a whole lot about. We haven't seen. And it's a chance for us to really gauge how good the teams are in the leagues down here matching up against teams from up north.
All right. Well, we can't wait to see how it all shakes out. Thank you again for tuning in this week. Be sure to follow us all week long on 360 Preps on Instagram, on Twitter, and 360preps.com and YouTube, of course, to find all our highlight and interview videos. And of course, we will be back next week. Maybe we'll break down a little wrestling. Maybe we'll look at some more with the basketball playoffs, how they develop. But we know we'll have a lot to talk about. So be sure to tune in, and we will see you out at the gym.